literal with you here, but as a person who has a double A at the beginning of her last name, I was first a lot in lines growing up. Now, I don't know if education in the schools has changed much since the mid to late 70s, but I was often seated near the front of the class, near the door, so I was an errand runner and a pencil sharpener and a go-to person. And often, not always, but often, the first in line to go down the hall. And then when it would seem like it would really matter, like it would be an honor to be the first in line, my teacher, especially Mr. Craigness in 6th grade, who I loved, would totally throw the seeming rule of the double A at the front out the window. He would delight then in going reverse alphabetical order on days when we would get our report cards and then get to go home a little early, and then I would be last, right? Or whenever we'd line up maybe to go do something fun, suddenly it was reverse alphabetical order. And I swear, because of the automatic default that the double A brought, it was the times when it seemed like it mattered the most when then the order would be reversed or completely dismissed. The last will be first, the first shall be last. How many times in your life has that been said to you? Or have you said it to someone else? And how many times have you said it as a comforting word? Because usually we're sort of nudging somebody, right? As your righteous indignation is rising in your throat when you thought you should have been in one place and now it's been revealed that you are in fact in a different place in the pecking order. Look where you thought you would be and look where you actually are is usually what's behind that when we say that to someone, right? Well, things are out of order today. They're really out of order. But let me get things a little bit in order for you in this chapter of the book of Matthew. So this story that Jesus tells today about the workers comes right after Peter has asked Jesus, hey, now we've left our livelihoods, we've left our entire lives to follow you. Are there going to be benefits? What's the purpose for us following you? Is there a dental plan? Peter seems to be asking, like, come on, tell us, Jesus, are there some fringe benefits here? And then what do they hear in return? But they hear this story in light of that question. It's sort of like Jesus is saying, what do you expect? And then he tips their expectations completely on their heads. And then, right after this story has been told, the mother of James and John comes to plead her case about why her sons should be on the left and the right of Jesus. It's like she didn't hear the story before that. And Jesus basically says, yeah, to sit at my right and my left comes in the shape of the cross. It's no wonder that at times the church can be seen as a club of insiders as we are busy patting ourselves on the back, making our way, trying to figure out our certain spots closest to Jesus, awaiting our certain reward, right? And get this, I just love it. It's Peter who Jesus says, I'll build my church on you. Because at least Peter was brave enough to ask the question that all the other disciples were thinking, like, why are we doing this, right? So today and every day, as followers of Jesus, Jesus tells us to go to the back of the line. And here's the thing. No matter where you are in that line, you get no less than anyone else. You get no more than anyone else. So, I told the Louis C.K. story last week, and I had to this week again. This is a comedian who has a show called Louis, and I don't recommend you go home and cue this up. If any sort of crass humor gets to you, this isn't your show, okay? However, his voice as a comedian is very prophetic. he points to deep, deep truths, and I want to share one of those with you today. So he has 2 daughters in the show, and he's been preparing a meal for them, and he has an extra slice of mango left over, and he gives it, to his oldest daughter, Lily, to eat. And his youngest, where did I put her name? Mary, I think. She says, well, she got a mango popsicle and I didn't. She whines. Now the mango popsicle was just simply the piece of fruit speared with a fork. That's right, her dad says, and he continues cooking. And he says, well, sometimes she gets things that you don't, and sometimes it goes the other way. That's just how life works. But Daddy, Jane pleads, it's not fair. Well, who said anything about fair, he asks. You were just fine without it until she got it. What's the problem? Well, it's just not fair, she insists. If she gets one, I should get one too. Look, he says, turning toward her and leaning down to meet her eyes, he says, the only time you need to worry about what's in your neighbor's bowl is if you're checking to make sure they have enough. That's the rub, isn't it? We often think, well, gosh, I've worked hard, I planned hard, I showed up early, I was on time, I did the homework, I have perfect attendance. We often will look around and think, no, I've worked harder than anybody else. I deserve more. We have an expectation of what it is we deserve based on what we think other people get sometimes, what other people deserve. When in reality, following Jesus means we should be looking in other people's bowls to make sure they have enough and to help them if they don't. Which is the deal when you follow Jesus. Jesus reverses everything and levels the playing field. And do you know what the reality in that story was today that you participated in? The landowner gave everyone enough to live on for the day. Everyone got to eat that day. Everyone had enough. They didn't get more than they could use for that day, so they had to worry about their bowl, right? They didn't have to worry about spoiling or about where to store it and then become obsessed with what it is they'd gotten. They got enough for that day. God's justice means that there is enough. And we are able to see it that way. And are we able to see it that way? And to see that we are involved with the task of others having enough. Can you see your involvement in that work? How is it that you are asked on a daily basis to give so that others have enough? You see, seeking our own sense of what we think justice is as opposed to God's justice. Well, our justice often involves timelines and spreadsheets and bean counting. Seeking our own justice often makes us feel good because it evens things out and it makes things fair. But seeking God's justice means that we are equal to everyone else, and that everyone else is equal to us in the eyes of God. Seeking God's justice means opening our hands or opening our mouths to speak out when someone else can't speak or when they won't be listened to let them or to help them get enough. You see, seeking God's justice means that you're going to be asked to go to the back of the line and then speak for those who haven't even thought about queuing up for the line, right? God's going to ask you to look at the people that are around you and act on their behalf, right? So that other sheet of paper that was in your weekly says discipleship or disciple behaviors at the top. And it's a way that we have lifted up as a way to live as River of Hope, knowing full well that we are bound to fail and that we are bound to be forgiven, right? We are forgiven by a God who remains stupidly in love with us and faithful to us when we mess up. It is not, this piece of paper isn't about a law, but it's about trying to follow Scripture as a way that we behave as a community, offering each other forgiveness, especially when that's hard, right? Living into that. So one of our guiding principles is disciples seek God's justice and not our own. But you know what that means, right? That's hard and it's scary because suddenly we could be mistaken for those people, right? Now in today's scripture, the laborers who were hired first and worked all day were mad to be lumped into the same category as those people, saying, and they said this, they said, "You've made us just like them. You've made us equal to them." You see, seeking God's justice as opposed to our own, following Jesus, causes us to get lumped in with those people. And sometimes it gets us yelled at, right? It gets us yelled at for standing up and offering marriage for same-sex couples. It gets us yelled at for showing up in the bar downtown and singing hymns. Sometimes it gets us yelled at just being out in public because we are saying that God is already there in the people that we are meeting on the riverside or in the parade route or wherever it is we have shown up to have a meeting around town in a restaurant. We see that God is already there in those people, in us, right? Because we are those people. That's how God sees us. So God's justice, it doesn't look like we think it ought to look like, does it? So you know what? Just go ahead and go to the back of the line. Because this line is like no other line you've ever been in. Not the one from my childhood, not the one from any lines you've stood in, frustrating or long or unorganized. See, because when you're in God's line, the beginning is the end and the end is the beginning, and no one knows who is in front of whom. All we know is that it's God's line, and we are right where we belong with those people. And we say, thanks be to God. Amen.